Hello and welcome to Shift Change Radio Hour, the show where we say thank you to our local healthcare workers by playing their song requests on the radio.
We've got a new episode coming in hot that does just that. I'm Andrew, 4 personals and 1 technical Hix.
And I'm Michael, Triple Dribble Claytor.
Do you believe art can change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. Michael Claytor and Andrew Hix are both arts and health practitioners at the Shands Arts and Medicine program at the University of Florida Hospital in Gainesville. Michael, a musician, provides music engagement for patients, and Andrew, a literary artist, focuses on storytelling. During the pandemic, Michael and Andrew knew that not only were patients suffering, but the healthcare staff at the hospital were exhausted, stressed, and overwhelmed. They decided that they would team up and create a radio program that would show these healthcare providers, hey, we see you and we appreciate you. And that this show could foster a connection between health providers, patients, and the greater community beyond the hospital. This became the Shift Change Radio Hour. Last May, I attended an Arts and Health Intensive at the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida. Artists and creatives from all over the country and a few from outside of the country joined together to discuss the ways in which we were using art to provide healing to our communities. One of the first things we did as a group was to work with Michael and Andrew to create a Shift Change radio program. They let us know what they wanted us to explore for this episode, and with a great deal of trust and good input and feedback, Michael and Andrew helped us create this work with them. For me, it was really inspiring to see how well collaboration in creating audio content can be. So today, Michael and Andrew are joining me on the show to talk about Shift Change Radio Hour and about their work as arts and health practitioners. You want to know how you can really help me keep this show going? Follow me on your favorite listening app. So easy, right? And if you really want to give the show a boost, leave me a 5-star rating or review. Hi, Michael and Andrew. Thank you so much for being on Art Heals All Wounds. Can you just introduce yourselves, who you are and what you do? Maybe, Michael, you go first.
Sure, yeah. I'm Michael Claytor. I'm a musician and a songwriter and a performer, and I work for a program called UF Health Shands Arts in Medicine here in Gainesville at the UF Health Hospital. And I'm a what we used to call a musician in residence. Now we call arts and health practitioner. And I'm basically a musician in the hospital who provides music engagements for patients. And I, along with Andrew, am a co-producer of our hospital-based staff-targeted radio show called Shift Change Radio Hour.
Wow. Okay, Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, I'm Andrew Hix. I work in a lot of the same programs and positions as Michael. I'm a co-producer of Shift Change Radio Hour at UF Health Shands Arts and Medicine. One thing that's a little different is that I'm a literary artist here. So in my role as arts and medicine practitioner, I actually focus more on storytelling, and that's how I came into the radio show.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I think I just assumed you were both musicians.
I'm not a professional musician, but I am an amateur musician and enjoy playing multiple instruments. I do a lot of songwriting, and I don't focus much on my skills with the instruments.
Oh, wow. So I would love to know more about each of you. So maybe Andrew, we'll start with you. You probably didn't start as a small kid saying, I want to be an arts and health practitioner. So tell me about your background and your journey to finding yourself in your current role.
Sure. When I was really little, I wanted to do what my dad did, which was environmental specialist for the power company. A lot of his job was trying to keep manatees safe and studying the local ecosystem in the swamp where I grew up, which was in South Florida. And then later, I decided I had more interest in my mother's job. I don't know why I considered money outside of my parents, but unlike a lot of kids, I was interested in what my parents did, and I decided I wanted to be a teacher. But I was very interested specifically in literature and stories and games and all of that potential in that space. So I started teaching through the English degree at UF that I acquired at University of Florida. That didn't work out. I worked at a charter school in Brooklyn for a very short amount of time in New York, and then came back and ended up going to massage school because friends recommended it.
Wow. Okay. That is a really interesting journey. I totally would want to be what your dad did as well. It sounds amazing and maybe a little bit ahead of his time in terms of really working with a power company to protect wildlife. But maybe not. Maybe I just don't know enough about it. But I think it's so interesting because you took on massage is also a form of care.
Yeah, that was when I really came into the idea of wanting to help people heal. As a teacher, I cared about others, but it was more about interfacing with students and young people. It was a lot of fun. But as a massage therapist, I got used to the idea of being specifically related to health. And from there, as I was doing Qigong and Tai Chi at a local studio and later dojo here in Gainesville, I started working as a martial artist in residence at Arts and Medicine. And from there, started doing massage and later came in through my educational background to replace an outgoing literary artist.
Okay, well, that's an amazing background and it makes a lot of sense. It's a very circuitous journey, but it makes sense how you wound up here with the different things you're trying. Michael, what about you? How did you wind up doing what you're doing?
My journey is a lot simpler than Andrew's. I've been a musician since I was a kid. I started playing drums in middle school and, learned guitar through the years. And I always wanted to be a musician. And I didn't know that this was a thing that I could do. I didn't know anything about arts and health growing up or when I was learning music. And I went to college here in Gainesville at University of Florida. And I played in a lot of bands around town and stayed after college for a couple of years. And eventually I had heard about arts and medicine as a student, but still it wasn't really on my radar as something I could do until I had a friend who was working here as a musician in residence. And she asked me to come in and shadow her one day and see what the job was all about. Little did I know that she was moving away and they were looking for musicians to take her spot and that I was one of the candidates to do that. So as soon as I found out that there was an opportunity to be here, I jumped at the chance to join the team. And I've been here now since 2013. And yeah, it's obviously a different kind of thing than being a performing musician and recording musician as like outside of a healthcare setting, but it's rewarding in different ways as well. So I've loved it ever since I started.
Okay, so we're going to follow on that thread. And Michael, if you'll just continue why it's rewarding, and then Andrew, I would love for you both, as you're talking about why it's rewarding, to talk about what you actually do there at the hospital. So Michael, continue on that thread. What do you do and why is it rewarding for you?
Yeah, so most of my job is providing music engagements with patients in the hospital at their bedside, typically. I do a lot of performing at the bedside. I do songwriting at the bedside. We have a mobile recording studio where we can record songs with patients at the bedside. And it's rewarding for all the reasons you think it might be. You're working with people who are sick in the hospital, and it's like patient-facing work that you feel like you're offering something to someone who is in a tough spot, and you build relationships over time with long-term patients, and those can be really deep and meaningful. And, just in the same ways that it's meaningful, it can also be really challenging. To lose people or to watch people get sicker can be really difficult, but just the idea of being able to offer something that people enjoy, that people can find some relief in, that people can express themselves through, it's rewarding just like you think it would be.
Do patients if they can, often sing with you when you're performing?
Yeah, not everybody wants to do that, but when they do, it can be really fun. And we have people who are musicians that are admitted in the hospital, and we do jam sessions together. We do song pulls where we trade off who plays songs. I've given guitar lessons. We've done lots of sing-alongs and things like that. It's we say it's patient-led work. We're not arts therapists or expressive arts therapists. We are musicians and artists in residence. So we kind of leave it up to the patient. We don't have any clinical goals. We go in and say, what do you want to do today? And kind of follow that thread. So we do all kinds of stuff. And that's another thing that I love about it is it's never the same. It's never the same thing every day. It's never the same thing every room. You're constantly doing new types of projects and being challenged to expand your boundaries. And I love that about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most mind-blowing, revolutionary things that I have learned is that the lack of clinical goals and the patient-led experience can be healing in and of itself. Yeah. Well, Andrew, I would love to hear what you do as a literary practitioner because I did not know that about you. So I would love to hear more about that.
So one of the things that's the most interesting to me about being a literary artist in the hospital is that it's very rare that sessions are alike. So the things that people tend to want when it's patient-led and they're doing literary experiences, they often have something very specific in mind that I may not have that much practice facilitating in the hospital when I first encounter it. But then once it becomes a pattern, then I know, okay, this is something that I do. This is something that I offer. I have some things that I'll offer like blackout poetry or various forms of short poetry that I can simply present prompts for short stories and poems to patients and they can work on them with me or on their own time. But often it's a special project that someone has an interest in. And through storytelling and conversation, I'll find out about that project. Like I want to make a children's book with pictures. And then it becomes a collaboration between visual artists. Perhaps I have the role of an editor and then the patient as writer. Or they want a journal and then they talk to me about what they're writing. Or they're working on a story at home, like a novel, and they want to tell me all about it. So I ask questions and I speak to the literary merit of some of their choices and really engage them on that level that they may not even have much engagement outside of the hospital in that way. So it's really diverse, the kind of work that I do when I wear the literary hat. And a lot of it is legacy work, especially lately. I've been working with patients who they want to bring letters or be recorded speaking to their children and telling stories and offering advice when they know that they are likely to experience death soon. So they and their family will work together to create recordings and offer special projects that will show their loved ones how much they care. And that's really powerful also for the staff too.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that. And when you were saying that is how do those types of projects and working with patients who are terminal in that way, how does that affect you as an arts practitioner?
It's rough. I've grown to recognize some of the stages of grieving that I'll go through in patient care. It usually takes me a couple of weeks where I'll just know that I feel a little different after a patient has passed, that I've gotten to know. I'll know that I'll be sadder and I might have unexplained sighing noises that come out of me as I just don't really reflect always consciously on patient work at home, but I will reflect in other ways. I find that with massage therapy, actually, I get much closer to people sometimes in a way that I spend so much time in physical proximity with them and touching directly into their illness. Whereas in the work, the literary artwork is often very creative, or it all happens in one go. Like I come and I record with them and we spend an hour together and then I put it down. And in that way, I sometimes become less attached to the people, though I still feel something certainly when they pass, especially for their family as well. But I find that the different kinds of connections actually feel different when someone's approaching or has experienced end of life.
I met you both doing the Arts and Health Intensive. During the online virtual part that we did before, there's a lot of talk about self-care. And as you both speak, I am wondering about that for both of you. So, Andrew, you were just talking about noticing different stages of grieving and behaviors after someone has passed. What do you do for yourself for self-care?
So I have a few different categories of self-care that I try to do regularly. One is my personal practice of practicing Qigong, which is a kind of for those who aren't familiar, it's similar to Tai Chi. It's a relaxation exercise, and it works on various parts of the body to help bring about a kind of mind-body approach to relaxation, meditation, things like that. That helps me a good bit because it helps me get in touch with my feelings and helps them move through at the same time. So that's very nice. I have recently, in the past year or so, especially in the past few months, I started seeing a therapist, which is very helpful. Through UF, I was able to get insurance that actually includes free therapy, unlimited. That's not all of us have that, but I do, and I very much cherish it. Free and unlimited are amazing words to go before the word therapy. So I'm very grateful for that and helping me process when there are work-related issues, including patient loss. And then other than that, we have our established routines among our coworkers. So we have our artist rounds on Wednesdays where we get to talk about patients, including talking about them when they die. And that can be a good way. If I write a story about a patient and my experience with them, I can speak it out at rounds and know that I've memorialized them for people who really care and understand and know what it's like to have that kind of relationship professionally.
Right, right. And Michael, I'm assuming that you experience similar grief when someone that you have worked with passes. And I'm wondering what you do. And even I imagine that there are needs for self-care, even if someone hasn't passed. So what do you do?
Yeah, Andrew covered a lot of great ways that a lot of us do. Reflective writing before our weekly meeting can be really helpful. You know, like a lot of artists, I use music as a way to process emotions and feelings and grief and all that kind of stuff too. And we have a really good team, and a lot of our team, or at least a handful of members of our arts and medicine program here, are longtime friends of mine that I knew even before joining this program. So I feel like I have really good connections with other people that can be sources of strength for me and people to lean on in those hard times for sure. Yeah, but it can be challenging. I also think there's a little bit of preventative self-care that I try to practice myself, which is maintaining really clear boundaries for myself with patients, with the work versus my personal life. And it doesn't always work. It's, people can break that bubble and you do become close to people who you work with here all the time. But in general, I really try to maintain those boundaries, and that can help. And that can help with longevity, with the ability to show up and do the work, and just with my own mental health for sure.
Yeah. Well, I just was reflecting. My dad passed in the hospital in fall of 2022. And as not necessarily the patient, but the family of the patient, it is true that I had, there were no arts practitioners, which I would have loved that. But among the nursing staff, I had my favorites. And it is true that I think boundaries are really important in giving care, because as a person who is in that grief and vulnerable position, I could totally imagine sort of like grabbing on to that healthcare practitioner in a way that would not be good for them. And so I think the discussion about boundaries is really interesting and important. The other thing that strikes me as both of you are talking is that where, your particular, your staff, your jobs, it's also geared to keep you healthy. It sounds like the reflective writing sounds really like an amazing practice. So it's not what we might often think of in terms of a healthcare setting where it's just, you sacrifice everything of yourself in order to give care for others, because obviously the burnout there and the effect on mental health would be very, very damaging. So that's super interesting to hear you even just describe your working conditions. So I met you both because you did this amazing session with our group recording an episode of the Shift Change Radio Hour. Can you talk about what that is? Love to know everything. When it got started, why it got started, how it got started. Either one of you want to jump into this first?
Sure, I'll kick it off, and Andrew, you can pick it up. So yeah, we have a radio program through our jobs at UF Health Shands Arts in Medicine, and we partner with a local radio station, WMBT 90.1 FM, The Wombat, here in Gainesville. It's a nonprofit station, and they reached out to us just at the same time we were looking for ways to sort of give back to nursing staff and care for the caregiver here a little bit during the COVID pandemic, when there was a lot of healthcare worker burnout, and nurses especially were having a very difficult time. There was short staffing, all kinds of issues, just making it really hard on them to show up and do their jobs. And so we decided that we would partner with this station and start a radio program to give back to them. And we take requests from healthcare workers here in Gainesville and play them on the air. We DJ song requests. We do feature pieces where we do interviews or little journalism spots about some intersection between arts and health that we notice around the hospital or in our community or beyond. Just anything that we find is related to what we do. And we have guest DJs. We do all kinds of fun stuff, and it runs twice a week, Wednesday morning and Wednesday evening, and we time it for drive time for most healthcare workers. Like, a lot of our nurses are here at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. So our show runs from 6 to 7, both a.m. and p.m. on Wednesdays. And we've been doing it for about 2 years now, 2.5 years, close to 3 years, Andrew. Can you believe that?
Amazing.
Wow. Well, what would you add to that, Andrew?
I want to add a couple of details. One is that I actually came onto the show slightly later than Michael. Michael was more of a founder, and I came in because I had extreme interest. I very much wanted to collaborate with Michael because we had been doing songwriting together, and I have been a fan of his music and presence since my college days. So it was something of a dream come true to work right alongside him in a project, because although all the artists sometimes work together in various ways, working on a long-term project like this that's now going on 3 years, I knew that it had a lot of potential to become a big kind of a game changer for staff relations, and largely a bridge between the hospital and all of the communities established in the hospital and the world at large, the local community of Gainesville, actually physically out on the airwaves. There's so much opportunity for storytelling and humanizing not only this healthcare environment, but really all of the people involved, from patients who then their staff learn about them in new ways because they hear about them on the radio, to patients and people at home learning about the staff's music preferences and seeing them more as people like them who have controversial music preferences they might enjoy or not. So I think radio has a really big underrated sense of what it can do now. That since I was young, I was very excited about the prospect of like radio dramas. This is before podcasts and all that. Now it seems like it's ripe for the picking for us to be able to engage in this medium, and not that many people are doing it. So I'm very excited to be pioneering in that way.
One thing that I noticed when we recorded our episode during the Arts and Health Intensive is that it was not what I was expecting it to be. When you think of an arts and health radio show, all kinds of things that might seem a little bit clinical, a little bit, a little bit narrow might pop into your mind. And your show was just so wide open. I was really surprised by, you just let our cohort take it over. Whatever music they wanted to request, their stories they wanted to share. And I'm wondering, was it always that way, or did you start with a more sort of tightly controlled idea and then it opened up? Or how did this evolve from the beginning?
That's a good question. I think it was always pretty open. And I think part of the reason for that is, unlike a lot of radio shows, ours is completely request based. So even if we're DJing, we're not selecting the music all the time. So we kind of have to be open to a lot of different styles of music and different types of requests. And also, we always kind of had the idea that for our feature pieces, especially, that we would always just look for some connection between art and health. And that's a really wide net to cast. Like for any sort of healthcare story, you can find an art angle and vice versa. You can talk to any artist about any sort of health or mental health or well-being related topic that they might be thinking about or dealing with. So we've been able to really cast a really wide net for all kinds of different stories that we like to tell. And so it kind of has always been that way. And the longer we go, the deeper we can dig and the more stories we find because of the broad scope of our show.
How do you feel about the evolution? Andrew, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've agreed with everything Michael's said so far. And I would say that we iterate a lot. We meet problems and have conversations all the time, especially if we haven't had one in a minute. We will set aside time to say, it's been a couple of weeks. What are we noticing? What are we going to do about this whole new craze? Everybody wants to hear this one song. Sometimes those sessions actually result in full new segments that become staples of the show. And that's because we're open to it and trying to spend a little extra time digging a little deeper and brainstorming and getting to somewhere that's not just, well, we have to cut that part or we have to stop asking people this. We want to meet people where we're at, and that's a very complicated problem. So sometimes we solve it by letting the show evolve and seeing what that does to it.
Well, I want to go back to something you said, Andrew, and ask you both if you feel like this has happened. You were talking a lot about community and connections between different groups, both within the hospital, within the healthcare workers, and then with the larger community. And I'm wondering if you've seen that happening.
Absolutely. So I have a few central maxims that I keep in mind when I think about what the show is really for. And the metaphor of the bridge is the one I come back to the most. We literally bring people across distances because, for example, we might take them into the patient room. That includes people who are listening on the internet because my mom told her sister who lives in Michigan to listen to the show. And now she can find out what's going on in a hospital room in Gainesville. But it also includes the clinical leader who is a few feet from that patient. They might be, 100 feet away, but they don't know what's going on inside that patient's heart and mind, that what they're experiencing. And there's no way to find out that same information that you'd get when someone decides they're going to go on the radio show and share their story. That is not the same information they would get, even if they did know what questions to ask and where to go. In addition, we bridge people who are artists in the community back to staff at the hospital and patients at the hospital to help them have more fun interfacing with the people around them. I often say that hospital is public health. People often talk about public health as being things that happen outside of the hospital, but everyone in the hospital comes from the community and returns to the community one way or another after they leave. And I think about that, how we are really facilitators, translators. We're working sometimes in metaphorical spaces, but largely we do bring people to places and give them access to stories they couldn't physically get to, even those who are local to this environment who listen on the radio.
Michael, what have you noticed since starting this show in terms of the community building, these sorts of connections that Andrew was talking about?
Well, something that's a little bit challenging about the radio format for us is how hard it is to get quantitative data on our listenership. We're just blasting out a signal and hoping that people grab it and listen in their cars or something. But what is nice is how much we can rely on anecdotal feedback and people reaching out to us and telling us about a story that was meaningful for them, or a song that they loved and they got to hear, or the fact that we played their request. Those sorts of things are great, and we do get that kind of stuff a lot. But it's also nice to be able to engage the arts community here with our healthcare Arts in Health show. And so we have feature segments like one called Songs in Practice, where we interview songwriters about music that they've written that deals in some way with health or well-being, whether that's the topic of the song or whether the writing of the song itself was helpful for them in some sort of, mental health or emotional health way. So it's nice to be able to offer an outlet for local artists, and it's nice to be able to offer an outlet for people who are artists but don't share their art so much, like certain healthcare workers have shared their art for the first time on our radio show, and that's really cool. And it's a great way to like Andrew said, to kind of teach people about the people that you're around every day in ways that maybe you don't get to see them normally.
Well, what I'm also curious about is what the impact of doing this show has been on each of you. I don't know who wants to take that one first, but
I'd like to take it. I think the show has helped me a lot in connecting with my own local community. I feel more confident now that I know that I'm in the habit of putting myself out there on the, again, literal airwaves. I've grown into my role as a DJ and a facilitator of content, a producer. I really like writing for the show, and when I put it together, I know I'm learning and I'm growing as I'm doing it, and I take that into the world, and I want to hear from people about how they interacted with the show. So I want to talk to them. I want to enjoy collaborating with artists in the community. Then I get to know them. Then I get to write with them and have fun. And it's really opened up a lot of avenues just to develop as a person in a community here, where I might have not known what to ask people about or felt confident approaching them.
Mm.
I would also add to myself that the work that we do, Michael and I and the other practitioners and artists in residence, it's hard to explain to people in a way that doesn't feel really sad sometimes. And the show doesn't have that same vibe. It doesn't have the same quality to it. If we talk about how we're sharing stories or getting song requests, people kind of assume that it's fun. Whereas if we talk about how we're playing, like if Michael's playing for someone's family as their family member is passing, or if I'm recording the words of advice someone won't be able to give to their daughter, that doesn't really, people disengage sometimes because it's so heavy and it's so intense, or they might be curious, but now they're curious about this very heavy and intense thing. Whereas the show lightens it and without filtering out that content.
That is really interesting. It's kind of a lovely balance for you as a practitioner.
Yeah.
Michael, what would you add to that? How has this show changed you?
Yeah, I feel all of the things that Andrew just said for sure myself. One thing that I would add is that the simple fact of having a deadline every week has sort of changed my mindset as an artist and a creator, and knowing that we got to get a radio show out the door by Monday for Wednesday's airtime every week, regardless of how ready we are to ship it out, is a really good, healthy exercise for me. And, as artists, I think a lot of times we wait to put out the most meticulously crafted and curated pieces, but I don't think it matters as much as we think it does. And this show has kind of helped me to learn that about myself and my art.
Yeah, that's an amazing, excellent point for a lot of creatives. Well, I'm so glad you came on the show. I learned so much watching you put together this episode in a very short amount of time, and with such an appearance, at least, of complete faith that you could turn it over, just give us a little bit of guidance of what we should do, what you were looking for, and then just sort of sit back knowing that this was going to pull together. It was a really amazing experience, really one of the highlights for me of that 3 days there. So thank you for being on the show and talking more about it. Anything else you want to say before we close this episode?
I'll just say thank you for having us. And it was, and that session that you're talking about during the intensive was, I'm glad it came across the way it did for you, because that was the first time we'd ever done it that way. And we weren't sure it was going to work until we got about halfway through. Like, I think we're going to actually make it to the finish line here and have a whole episode. But that was really fun for us too. And I'm glad you got to be there for it.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Andrew?
Same. Definitely. Thank you. This was a really fun experience. I didn't know what it would be like because this is actually our first podcast that we've been on, aside from our own, in this capacity. So it was really fun. The questions were so insightful, and I really felt like I had a chance to even today develop some of my concepts that'll help me go forward and work on the show in the future and do these kinds of translational experiences. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, you're both naturals. You were born with headphones and a microphone in front of you. So I am so happy that you were on the show, and I now have a great radio show to listen to coming out from Gainesville. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Thank you so much to Michael Claytor and Andrew Hix for sharing the story behind Shift Change Radio Hour. They've really inspired me on the beauty of collaboration and the way that community-centered arts programs can create connection and healing. I'll put more about the Shift Change Radio Hour in the show notes. If you'd like to get in touch with me, please reach out to me at my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com. You can sign up for the newsletter or just send me any kind of note that you feel like sending. Thanks for listening. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova.